so I think we'll get started here. My name is Matthew Mickleborough. I am founder and analyst at Junior Resource Investing, hosting a panel here now today called Northern Frontiers, where CEOs discuss Canada's untapped potential. Stories of the wild north permeate our Canadian culture, untamable mountain ranges and struggles for survival. And so too are visions of hidden treasure lurking in that wild north, waiting to be found. Places and events and people like the Klondike Gold Rush, traversing the Chilkoot Pass, prospectors driven by visions of glory, and Sam Steele making sure that we keep the frontier safe and secure. All of these are touchstones of historical Canadian identity. But while these stories are history, they are also by no means dead and gone. And indeed, the promise of remarkable resource endowment in Canada's north remains. And a new generation of Canadian explorers are headed north to see what fortune they can dig out of the frozen lands up there. So joining me are CEOs of 3 companies chasing discovery and glory just like the prospectors of old. We've got Simon Ridgway, who's the CEO at Rackla Metals, Chad Williams, interim CEO at Honey Badger Silver, and Fletcher Morgan, CEO at TDG Gold Corp. So gentlemen, thanks for coming on today. And I guess maybe let's start off by just introduce yourselves and your companies, just like classic elevator pitch. And why don't we start with Fletcher? I'll start with you.
Oh, well, thank you very much for inviting me on this panel today. I hope everyone can hear me fine. So Fletcher Morgan, CEO and director of TDG Gold Corp. I've been involved with TDG since 2020 when we listed on the TSX Venture. We're focused on brownfield assets in the Toodoggone district of north central British Columbia. We're lucky that we have a Mines Act permit covering a key area of one of those projects called Shasta. We have a 43-101 mineral resource estimate on Shasta. In combination of indicated and inferred ounces, it's just over 1.1 million ounces open and pittable. We were beavering away on that project, looking to grow it, and we've published information about the ways we thought to grow it. And then on January the 17th, everything changed for us. January 17th this year, Freeport, working with Hunter Dickinson, made a major discovery.
Shucks, I'm sorry, Fletcher. We've lost your audio there. I apologize.
The Wi-Fi went out, yeah.
I don't think you can hear either by the sound of it.
Yeah, shucks.
Can we send him a note?
Yeah, I'll let Kyle know to try to help him out. I'm sure he'll just log out and log in there. So why don't we, Simon? We'll pass off to you. I'll give Fletcher a chance to reset there, and we'll try again with him. But Simon, do you want to lead us off, and we'll start again?
Sure. So Simon Ridgway, CEO of Rackla Metals. Rackla is working up in the Northwest Territories, actually, just beside the Yukon Northwest Territories border. We're looking, exploring for reduced intrusive related gold systems. So similar to the discovery made by Snowline back in 2022, we picked up a large land position in the intrusive belt of rocks that form the Tombstone Gold Belt, and we've been exploring them now. This is the 3rd season we'll be working. Late last year, we made a nice discovery on the Grad property, a whole mountainside of cut with gold veins, which is a rig system for sure. We'll start drilling it in about a week. So that's really the elevator pitch. We're well financed. We've got $10 million in the treasury. The drill will be turning 7 to 10 days. So the truth machine will tell the story.
Imminent. Yeah, timing is everything. And Chad, over to you.
Okay, I'll start off with a little bit of poetry, and because we are talking about the North. For those the folks that are on the line that have never heard of Sam McGee, I'll read a little passage. So, there are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The Northern Lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the marge of Lake Labarge, I cremated Sam McGee. Probably the greatest poem in Canadian history. And if anybody who's interested in the Yukon or the North, it's a must read. I won't spoil it. It's got a really interesting end. But I mention this because, the Yukon is indeed a magic place for many reasons, not just Sam McGee and the Klondike Gold Rush and the Northern Lights and and all kinds of very interesting things. I think we all agree that that part of the world has tremendous geology. And, one of the reasons that there are many good things happening and have been happening, let's say for the last decade or so, is because it's an area that's underexplored. So it's blessed, nature's blessed it with great geology, but it's also very underexplored. And in terms of honey badger, we're about a 10 million market cap. We're raising money right now, so we'll have a couple of million in the bank and then some after that. I own about 25% of the company, which is somewhat unusual. And simplistically, we have 7 silver projects, all of them in the north. That's somewhat by design, but mostly by happenstance. Those 7 projects, 3 of them have a resource. The 4th one arguably has a resource as well because it's a former mine, the Nanisivik mine. In fact, Nanisivik was a very prominent world-class mine for a long time until the commodity prices went down. So we have about 150 million ounces of silver equivalent. So if you do the quick math, it's less than 5 cents enterprise value per share. So we're trading at a very low value. And we have 2 major projects. Because people ask me all the time, you've got 7 projects, where do you focus? And I think that's a fair question. The 2 projects that we'll be working on this year are Plata and Nanisivik. So Plata, by the way, we own 100% of all our projects. So Plata is located adjacent to Snowline. It was discovered before Snowline, actually, and it was a silver prospect project, and in fact, a very small but very high-grade silver mine for a while. The grades were so high that they were putting the silver in bags and flying those bags to Idaho for smelting. But long story short, the more we get into the geology of Snowline, and we'll talk about the seasonality of exploration, and there's pros and cons to it. But we were very busy in the winter doing a lot of background work on Plata, and the more we get into the Snowline geology and the Plata geology, the more we feel that we've got many similarities to Snowline. So not just silver, but some gold. And Nanisivik, as I mentioned, was a very prolific mine. There's a 100 million ton pyrite deposit that sits there still. They never mined it. It has some silver in it. We don't know exactly how much. But lo and behold, it also probably has some germanium and some gallium and all kinds of other interesting metals, which in those days they didn't care about because they didn't have cell phones. Obviously, we care deeply about those metals today. And we'll be doing some work at Nanisivik to surface the value on those metals at that project.
If that was a brief intro, I hate to hear your long pitch.
That's it, actually. I don't have anything else.
He's done it. Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. Well, I will say I wasn't expecting to hear Robert's service to start this out, so I'll give you points for that one.
It always sends shivers down my spine when I hear that.
Yeah. Fletcher, let's try.
Hey guys,
you again.
I hope. Am I back now? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Last we heard,
we can hear you. Yeah.
You were just going to tell us about how January 17th changed everything forever for you guys. That was
Yeah. So January 17th, Freeport and AMARC made a major discovery right on our boundary. It's gold-rich copper porphyry. Runs shallow to within 30 meters of surface on their side. And it runs at around 4 times the typical BC porphyry grade. So the idea, for us is to prove that it comes over our side of the boundary. We're funded to do that. We were lucky in February to attract investment from Skeena Gold and Silver. That's the money that we've got in Treasury, just over $12 million of flow through that we're looking to spend with some hard dollars as well for corporate purposes. So that field team has mobilized and the drilling is already locked and loaded and scheduled to begin middle of July. And then a couple of weeks ago, so June the 17th, so 6 months to the day after the Aurora discovery on our boundary, we've announced a major transaction with a concurrent board deal financing. And we're looking to come out the other side of that as a BC focused copper gold preeminent explorer with a platform that's well cashed, about 160 million pro forma market cap and $40 million plus in treasury, and looking to, run projects in parallel. And I know we'll get into that when you ask more of the questions that we're expecting to discuss today. So thank you. And I apologize for the technical problems that I had.
No, excellent. We're all pros here, right? So, well, no, I think that people can probably, if I say, what are the pros and cons of working in the North, people, they can imagine challenges being expenses and the remoteness, et cetera, and we'll cover those. But we'll start off, give you guys the chance to kind of to pitch why the North has its own critical advantages. And I guess that's this question, right? What do you think are maybe some critical advantages of working in the North that you think maybe average investor overlooks or maybe doesn't quite take into account well enough? And Chad, I'll ask you to start off with that one. Oh, you're on mute, Chad. You're on.
What? I can pick that up if you want me to.
There, looks like he's.
Oh, sorry, I was on
there.
mute. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Simon, if you want to jump in.
Okay, I'll jump in a little bit. I guess for me, part of the benefit of working in the North, in the Yukon, is that, there's some really excellent prospectors and geologists up there that are uncovering discoveries all the time. That, we're getting these waves of Yukon exploration, but people like, there's Ron and Scott Verdal and Sean Ryan and Tara Christie are really making these world-class discoveries that are dragging people back into the Yukon territory again. So these, exploration always ebbs and flows wherever you are. And the Yukon has seen several rushes over the last 10 or 15 years, but mostly they've been driven by these local prospectors and geologists making discoveries and creating gold rushes up there. So that is part of the attraction of the Yukon. It's just those homegrown people doing fantastic work,
Knowledge base, yeah, excellent. Chad, you're on mute again, but I guess Fletcher, how about you? I'll ask you to. What do you think? What are some advantages that maybe people underestimate?
Yeah, I'll add on to what Simon said. I'll echo that to begin with. Relatively little systematic large-scale programs in our part of north central British Columbia. But then to take that a step further is the infrastructure in our case. So some of the work that did take place through the 70s, 80s, 90s, our last mining operation on our property package shut down in 2011. And so we're blessed that the infrastructure into there was developed. And so I think people probably don't understand how accessible some of these remote parts of north central British Columbia actually are. And in the case of the Antioch acquisition that we proposed, that's deep water port access. So British Columbia is very well endowed with infrastructure. I know there's ambitions to improve it. You can add into that the hydroelectric and other high voltage power lines that were put in place for other mining operations. And then the other thing that I'll highlight, and then I'll hand over to Chad, is working in partnership with First Nations. In our case, it's multiple First Nations. They're very natural resource experienced, and not necessarily in mining. In certain cases, yes. But certainly when it comes to forestry and other, extraction or exploitation of natural resources. So working with those has been really, really great. They have incredible local knowledge. And remember, a lot of what has actually transpired and happened over the previous decades that, again, adds to that incredible knowledge base that Simon mentioned.
No, excellent. So Chad, Fletcher, and Simon kind of they discuss sort of exploration and intellectual infrastructure, right? Intellectual infrastructure, exploration infrastructure. Is there room for you to add to that or expand on those ideas?
Sure. Yeah, a tiny bit. I mean, the guys covered it, but there's no doubt that the elephant in the room for all of us is the high cost of work up there. And, the key, of course, is having road access if you can, or in the case for us, Nana Civic, for example, the government of Canada just put in a deep water port to service the icebreakers. So, at the end of the day, we need to cling on as much infrastructure as we can to lower our exploration costs. One advantage that hasn't been mentioned is, for example, Yukon's a case in point. Their economy is not multi-dimensional. There is some tourism, but forestry doesn't really exist. They are essentially landlocked. And so the government for years now has encouraged, exploration and mining. It's been a very important focus for, and that's a good thing. Many jurisdictions in the world don't want mining at all. The Yukon government seems to want to encourage it. And there are First Nation issues like there are everywhere else in the world, but in the jurisdictions where we operate, the First Nations are usually very open to, again, for the reason there isn't a lot going on, so they're open to the type of work that we do. They understand it better than they would in other locations. Many First Nations are in businesses, logging or construction or that kind of a thing, so they get it. So it makes the work a little bit more easy, I guess, than it would in other jurisdictions that are less knowledgeable about construction and mining.
Yeah.
Can I add something to that?
One thing we haven't mentioned, mentioned is the Canadian mining law that, keeps all that data available to us. Like the last 120 years, everything that's been done in the Yukon, in BC, in Northwest Territories is documented. We can find out who went to this claim, what they did, what they got. I mean, that is an incredible system that I don't know any other country in the world that's got that. Do you guys?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I know other countries are trying to emulate it.
Yeah, no, it's quite amazing. Then I can go back, after Snowline's discovery, I spent the next 3 months looking at all the intrusive rocks in the Tombstone Belt to the east of that, and I could see exactly what's been done, what they found, what they looked for, pretty much every sample that was taken. And all of us report what we got. Like, it's not that we hide the results. So most companies in Canada, they file all the work they did, all the results they got legitimately, and that information is available. Once we drop
in our case, it was over 60,000 meters of historical drilling that we were able to have access to, not just the data and information that Simon just mentioned, but also some of the historical core that was stored at site. And so, yes, your exploration may be more expensive, but you're standing on the shoulders of everyone that went before you. And Vancouver, where I'm based, it's kind of amazing how these projects have passed hands. And you can still pick up the phone and speak to some of the guys that did the last round of work during whatever the last cycle was. I'd just like to build on another point, though, that Chad mentioned to do with government. And, obviously the global picture is changing on a day-to-day basis at the moment. We don't know what's going to happen next, in certain parts of the world. What we do know is there's some themes that are emerging, and those are of strategic supply, critical minerals, working in partnership with local communities. All of these things, I think, Canada has been at the forefront. And I think a lot of other parts of the world are playing catch up. When you're looking to try and secure supply of these metals, you really don't have to look much further than the endowment that we've got in Canada and the opportunity that's now in front of us. And as recently as yesterday, I'm sure a lot of the people participating in this webinar are aware that, the NATO spending requirements have been committed now at 5% of GDP. And Mark Carney has come straight out and said, the contribution from Canada shouldn't just be military, it should be, natural resource supply to support that. So where's that money? That's $150 billion a year. And NATO has 12 critical minerals identified. Canada has them all. We've got 34 on the government website. I made no bones. I've been on other webinars and said I'd like to add at least another 2 to that list, gold and silver, right? But I think we're sitting in the middle, the eye of the perfect storm right now. And with these guys on this panel and everyone that we know, Canada is ready to go. And I'm just hoping that the government continues along this path and lets us do what we do best. And I don't think there's any other group of entrepreneurs, prospectors, and the support for it that you'll find in any other developed country that's better than Canada, other than maybe the likes of Australia and obviously the US.
No, excellent. I think that's a That's a good clarion call for the best practice. It is Canadian resource extraction, right? And so yeah, we'll continue on here. I really wanted to chase rabbits about when do you make the decision to relog old core? You talk about having old core, and that can be an arduous journey doing that. But yeah, maybe I'll sidestep that unless someone has a really passionate opinion on that one. But exploration strategy adjustments. Why don't we talk about that, right? I mean, so you have your shoulder seasons, right? I mean, if it frees up, it's great, and then in the summer it's great. You have your shoulder seasons where it's a bit more of a challenge, right? And so because exploration is this very sort of iterative, reiterative, cyclical process where you're taking data and then and layering it and analyzing and collating and doing it all over again, it always having that sort of interruption in that cycle when it comes to limited field seasons, or just the remoteness or the expenses required to advance these things. How do you account for that? How do you adjust for that? How do you minimize the impacts of that? And Simon, I'll go to you, and then Chad, and then Fletcher.
Well, I guess, it gives you time to take a look at your results and look at the mistakes you made or the positive moves you made. So, as far as marketing goes, I think you got to try to end every season like a good TV series. Every series ends on a high note. You got to try to end this season with something you can talk about all winter. So, but it is a challenge, certainly. I mean, where we are now in the Northwest Territories, our season will start next week and it'll end at the end of September. So we've got 4 months to try to prove the continuity of the target we've got. So we've got to hit it hard and hit it fast with the money. You've got to have the money in place before the season starts and, generate enough information that you can keep the market's interest over the next several months of the winter time as you're planning for the follow-up season. Hopefully by next season, we'll be planning a 20,000 meter, 30,000 meter drill program on the project we have, not a 5,000 meter program.
Chad, what about you? Any sort of mitigation strategies or adjustments that you make to kind of account for limited field season or just that sort of a remoteness aspect?
There was an ad, I forget who it was, but the byline was, "It's the pause that refreshes." And so as an operating company, it's a good thing to pause, and especially in exploration, because when you're drilling, the data is coming in very quickly, and I'm sure everybody on the line has experienced cases where you just can't keep up, and then you start planning drill holes with limited information, and that becomes less efficient, let's say, less cost effective. So we have really no choice but to pause in the fall. And so ironically, as an operating company, as a mining company or exploration company, it's a good thing to have that pause. Unfortunately, the market, again, Pierre Lassonde once said that instant gratification doesn't happen fast enough anymore. And so the market's constantly on, this, okay, well, if we're not going to generate news, I'm going to sell it and buy something else. It's tough to build a company that way. And, what we try to do is when we do financings and when we can influence who the investors are a little bit, then we say, hey, listen, you've got to be a little bit patient with us because, our window is relatively short. These are complex geologic systems. But on the other hand, the potential is enormous. I mean, we just have to look at Snowline. It's got 1.3 billion market cap. If you do get it right, this is what happens. And there is no such thing as an overnight success in our business. It's an iterative process. So it sucks that investors don't like that. I don't think we're ever going to change that. And I know some companies, for example, they've got assets in the north and other assets, let's say in Arizona, where they can drill at other times of the year. But the point, though, is that I actually think it's a good thing because it allows companies to think, seek advice. And, for us, a great example at Plata, we were looking in a certain direction, not just like a physical geographic direction, but a geologic conceptual direction. And then, we started, because we had time, we took it a different way, and we're now looking at the project in a different manner. We wouldn't have been able to do that if we had a drill turning 24/7, 365 days a year.
No, well put. And Fletcher, I'll pass it over to you. Yeah, anything, it could be, and Simon kind of touched on it. You can discuss even that marketing, communications, investor relations perspective as well, if you like, or that's sort of just the actual kind of boots on the ground style. How do the kind of the practical realities of limited field seasons or that sort of approach, how does that impact your approach to how do you do your job?
My background is in strategy consulting, so I come at it from quite a systematic lens. So the three foundational pillars of strategic thinking are, efficiency, effectiveness, and adaptability. And what we lack is the ability to then adapt on the fly for the reasons that Simon and then Chad have mentioned. And so what we've laser focused on, and I know the other guys are doing this too, is efficiency and effectiveness. So you want to hit it hard, and you want to get the work done, and you plan, and then you plan again, and you make sure that you dot all your I's and cross all your T's before you head up there, and that's your efficiency and your effectiveness. And then in parallel, as a CEO, one of my mantras is to get out the way of the talent and in the way of the problems. And so a strategic problem we've got is that, how do you build in the flexibility so that if the guys want to follow up on something that they're into or they've spotted, how do you build that in? In our case, part of it was the attraction of brownfield. There's always the ability to, potentially drill underground. So to then extend the season that way. We acquired a fully winterized camp that would enable us then to extend the season. And you mentioned it. It's the shoulder seasons that are really the most challenging, as opposed to the summer itself or the winter within reason. And so that's the kind of approach that we've taken. The marketing communication side of it, there's a lot of information that you can gain and gather that doesn't, that you can't publish immediately. So you try to fill that gap in that way as well with studies and preparation. Then as you get into the new year, for example, into what, more forward-looking opportunities. So you can plug some of the gap that way. But in our case, that was actually part of the reason for the Antiox transaction that we've now announced. It's at way lower elevation. It has a different, longer season. And again, what we're trying to do is to smooth out that cyclicality that we all know and all of the disbenefits that come with it. But I think the guys are absolutely right to focus on the benefits of it. And that's certainly been really, our experience. That 6-month hiatus has been an opportunity to gather results, really think about the season. And then, as I mentioned, focus on efficiency and effectiveness. And that also then counteracts some of the additional costs that we experience. If we're getting the most bang for buck out of every dollar we're spending, then we're doing the best. We're doing the best we can.
No, well put. And so we'll transition over here. I mean, obviously, in the 21st century, community engagement is critical to any resource exploration story. In the North, I would guess probably, if anything, that's even further sort of emphasized, right? I mean, these are remote areas, but they're by no means unpopulated, and a lot of the populations have a sort of deep history with their land. And so I guess, I'll so Chad, then Fletcher, then Simon, I'll ask you just in terms of, when you talk about First Nations or local community engagement, are there differences in your approach from, Southern Canadian areas or even other areas in the world, similarities or differences, or even just what steps do you take to ensure kind of ongoing evergreen positive relations with local communities?
Well, it's top of mind. It is it's important, it's necessary, and quite frankly, it's the right thing to do to engage with the local communities, whether they're First Nations or not. And to answer your question, no, we don't approach the First Nations any differently than we would non-First Nations. The First Nations are very sophisticated, very well educated. Especially in the Yukon, they've got a track record, like where we operate, the Nacho Nayak Dun. They've got a track record of being involved in exploration, being knowledgeable about exploration, mine development. And this is not just over the last couple of years. This is many generations. Mining's occurred in their ancestral territory for many, many generations. So this is nothing new. There's an established more or less established path to how we interact with them, how we communicate with them, and so forth. And as you know, in the Yukon, all the territories, the First Nation territories, essentially all of them have been resolved and settled. So there isn't a lot of debate about, which band has power or not over which part of the land. So that facilitates things. Again, there are obvious disadvantages to being where we are, but there are obvious advantages. One of them is the level of knowledge of the First Nations, and they're at the end of the day, they're in favor, generally, not all of them, of course, but generally in favor of mineral exploration and mining.
Fletcher, any difference in approach or anything that you think might be unique in terms of engagement with local communities in the North versus elsewhere?
Well, I don't have experience of the elsewhere. So what I can speak to is my first impressions as I got involved in this sector around 12 years ago, fully immersed. Already at that point, we had UNDRIP, and obviously in the case of BC, the implementation of that has been at the forefront of quite a lot of the consultation that's been happening with First Nations, certainly in our area. It's been hugely positive. I think the rest of the world is going to follow, even if they don't want to, or they're going to be slow on the uptake. It's coming, and that puts Canada ahead. And and in our case, in our area, it puts us way ahead of the curve, and it's definitely something to lean into. I've been very lucky, and people who've followed our story and seen other webinars with me have heard me say this before, and so I apologize for repeating myself, but we were blessed to be able to work out of the gate with an individual by the name of Christy Smith. She's an MBA. She's a published author of working in allyship and partnership with, local communities in the natural resources sector. And she's of First Nation heritage herself. And I cannot speak highly enough of having someone like that who presents you the vision of how to do it properly, and also then guards that vision. And if you look at our corporate deck, that's the one slide that has never changed in our core. Everything else changes. What we discover, how much money we've got, how many shares there are, all of the, the team. The one slide that never changes is how we approach this. And it's for all the reasons that have been mentioned. Is they're so experienced, they remember everything that's happened before, and they are very entrepreneurial. Some of the most entrepreneurial people I've come into orbit with are from the local communities, and are way better entrepreneurs than I will ever be. And I learned something interesting yesterday. For example, one of the groups, one of the First Nations is about to launch an air service from South Terminal, I think at Vancouver Airport, up to one of the big airstrips near us to service the Tudagon district. I mean, that's unbelievable. And it will make exploration easier, more efficient. It'll mean visits can happen more regularly from other groups coming up to, check out the area. Oh my gosh, they're on the front foot. They're very, very well organized. They grew up, as Chad mentioned, with natural resources as part of their business opportunities that were in front of them. Many of them have embraced it, and more power to them. And let's get it on. Everywhere else is going to have to do this too. We're lucky that we've already. Well, I've been doing it since I got involved in this sector, and there's no plans to change that approach.
And Simon, maybe this is a good way for you to end. I know that you've been around the world in terms of your own discoveries and your own prospecting. Is there any? Can you give us any sort of salient differences in approach?
No, I think it's the same. Communication, consideration for the people in the area where you're working, consideration for the environment, but communication important. Getting there, letting people know what your plans are, why they're that way, that you're not mining, you're exploring. I mean, there's a lot of, especially in Latin America, there's a lot in the smaller areas or the more remote areas, there's a lot of, miscommunication. That people think the bags of dirt that you're taking away are actually got gold in them, as opposed to soil samples, So you really need to keep the communities involved in what you're doing, why you're doing it, and try to employ as many as you can and make sure that you generate as much employment as you can in the area. I mean, that's always a big case in Latin America. Rather than getting a cat in, get 30 people fixing the road, etc. So, we haven't, where we are in the Yukon territory, that's very remote. We're a few hundred kilometers from any of the communities, but the area that we just staked last year was just opened up for industry by the Satu Deni and the Northwest Territories government. So they want to see industry in this part of the Northwest Territories. So that was a very positive move. I think it's the same everywhere. Communication, consideration.
No, fair enough. Just an authentic efforts. And so I'll just take a moment here and I'll encourage people, if you have any questions. I see there's a couple that's gotten typed into the chat, but yes, there will be time at the end for investor-based questions. So take a second there, but maybe let's transition into kind of company-specific questions. And Simon, I'll bounce this one right back to you. I mean, you mentioned, right? I mean, Snowline, obviously, and then the reduced intrusion related gold systems. Maybe I kind of just buried the lead or answered my own question, but why is this deposit? Why is there so much sort of excitement and hype around these right now versus, like as you kind of said yourself, previous waves of exploration booms?
Yeah, well, number one, they're very large. They're world-class gold systems, right? Snowline's 8 million ounces, Banyan about the same. They're very large systems. They're usually very simple metallurgy. They're open pittable right at the surface generally. And there's some big ones. I mean, Snowline's discovery really got me back into the play. I lived in Dawson City back in the early 90s and I explored the Tombstone Mountains then. In fact, the first company I listed was called Tombstone because it was based on those intrusive suites. But so when I saw Snowline's discovery, I did all that research to the east of Snowline, and nobody had ever walked inside those intrusives to the east of Snowline in the Northwest Territories. They'd explored the sediments around them for lead, zinc, tin, tungsten. But as soon as they got to the intrusive, they turned around and went back down the creek again because that's not what they were interested in. The ones in the eastern Yukon were known to be tungsten rich and gold poor. Well, Snowline contradicted that, so I, did all the research and then just began staking all the intrusive bodies and getting boots on the ground inside the intrusive. The systems are large, simple metallurgy, and open pittable. That's the attraction to them.
And new. They're relatively new, and so it's opening up.
That's right. I mean, Fort Knox is probably the first one in Alaska. That was about 12 million ounces. That was a Friedland play way back when. But since then, I think in the Yukon, there's been, now with Snowline, probably around 30 million ounces found within these intrusive suites that have not been looked at before.
No, excellent. And Chad, one for you. Your own resume. You're a markets-based CEO rather than coming from the geological side of things, right? And so, I guess just in your own experiences, how does that result in maybe a different approach to exploration decision making for you and your team?
In terms of these particular types of deposits, you mean?
No, just in general with your leadership, right? You're bringing a skill set that you're bringing your skill set, and then how do you work as a team then from there? If you're not a geo like me, or I'm not a geo rather, pardon me, but if you're not a geo, how do you make sure that how do you work as a team to make these decisions? How do you rely on your team?
Right. Yeah. I mean, to your point, my background is mostly in finance, although I am a mining engineer. So I look at the technical aspects, the practical technical aspects. And, I have the deepest respect for geologists. I actually wanted to be a geologist when I was younger, because geologists have to look, outside the box. It's more of an art than a science. But at the end of the day, the art has to become a business, and so it doesn't. When we've been very active on the M&A front over the last 4 years, and we've acquired our assets through acquisition, not through discovery. And by the way, the assets that we've chosen to acquire are assets that we feel are on the right part of the value proposition curve, in the sense that grassroots exploration, if you do find something, you've got a huge win, right? But the reality is the odds are not in your favor. Why not buy something that's already discovered, already known, but not appreciated? So that's what we've been focused on buying and accumulating. That's what we have today. But all of these assets have to pass the test of what will make them economic? What this is not a science project. This is not a hobby. What will we have to do to make these projects become mines, become something that are things that are much more valuable? And so, we touched on infrastructure. We touched on, grade, size, is, as Simon said, these types of deposits, all of a sudden they're monsters, right? So if you've got a 2 million ounce deposit, like for example, if Snowline only had a 2 million ounce deposit, I don't think people would be very interested. It's just not enough. It doesn't make it. But because they're probably going to be a 15, 20 million ounce deposit, nobody really knows. Then all of a sudden it will bring the infrastructure to it. So the conclusion really of what I'm trying to say here is that it's great to explore and try to find something, but at the end of the day, there's got to be a financial return. It's got to be practical, because Mr. Market, the investor, will always, it's a every day they vote, right? Whether they buy or sell your stock, and they have to make they've got to realize whether this thing is going to become something that has potential in the future, rather than something that just fizzles out, huh? So it's got to satisfy lots of criteria. It's not a simple thing, and that's why I would challenge the investors. I'm very convinced that Simon and Fletcher have projects that satisfy these constraints or these criteria. But it's one thing to get a good drill hole, but it's another thing. It's many, many, many other things to get a mine. Mm-hmm. Okay, lots of things have to go right. And so, unfortunately, in our industry, we've got lots of promoters, speculators, and investors tend to get burnt. But at the end of the day, do your own due diligence, talk to the experts, and make sure that what you're investing in has credibility and legitimate. It's legitimately a good target to advance. Now, Matt, you're on mute.
It's my turn. Thanks. Okay, so Fletcher, I've got one for you here. You kind of mentioned off the start, AMARC and what they've done in the Toodoggone is sort of, everything changed, I think was what you said there. And obviously, that was a surprising and impressive discovery that they pulled off. Mm-hmm. And maybe do you want to, and we'll, like I said, this is kind of part 1 of 2 where we'll talk about Anyox next, but what has been the change up in the Toodoggone from there? I mean, how dramatic has it been? How much has it changed since that day in terms of just interest?
Huge. Yeah, no, it's a paradigm shift for the district. It's not that these shallow porphyries weren't predicted. There's over 10 PhDs written suggesting that there could be this kind of discovery. You may be aware that Comess itself is to the southeast of the Aurora discovery. And there's $1 billion of infrastructure, copper gold focused infrastructure sat there on care and maintenance. And I know Centerra put out a news release relatively recently that showed for the first time the condition that infrastructure is in, and it's in fantastic condition. They themselves now have invested into our neighbors to the northwest. So you're really, the layers to the onion here are starting to peel back and reveal themselves, and there's a lot more to come. But a paradigm shift is really undersells what's happened. That discovery itself, given the kind of calculations I've seen, it's hugely significant. And, just to sort of pick up what Chad said, mines are made by people. Discoveries happen with all the science, etc., but the mines themselves take people. And so you start from this fantastic, discovery, you calculate the resource, etc. And then after that, it really is a lot more. There's so many things involved in order to get something through to that mine development stage. And for us, what that discovery meant was it attracted, in our case, Skeena, to come and get involved in the district. The Toodoggone itself has this endowment of gold, silver, epithermal style mineralization that was really the focus in our part for the last sort of 5 or 6 years. Simply put, you've seen about $350 million of modern exploration in the Toodoggone since, our neighbors to the northwest, started plugging away. I think it was in 2016, 2017. Well, you're about to see $100 million spent in the Toodoggone in this year alone. And it's not just going to be us. It's going to be work going to the northwest, work going on by Centerra down to the southeast. And then obviously on our eastern boundary, Freeport has now signed a joint venture with Finlay Minerals. And so this exploration area is about to step up a level, the kind of level of investment that we've seen in parts of the Golden Triangle. We're now about to see in the Toodoggone for effectively the first time with modern exploration techniques. So hugely impactful. And for us, stating the obvious, it took our share price from where we were, up to where we are roughly now, attracted in a strategic investment from Skeena. And then we've been able to use that as a platform now to really think about what's the vision for the company and where do we want to see ourselves in the next year, 3 years, 5 years and beyond.
No, excellent. And then I kind of warned you, the follow-up then is, with that, right, with that sea change that is occurring up there because of that remarkable discovery, and as you said, the amount of interest shown in your company in the market now. So then why would you, with this newly proposed recent merger with Aniox, stepping out of the Toodoggone, right? And you did touch on this, right, in terms of what your vision with the company, what you want it to be, but then why, right? You've had this amazing kind of response to the Toodoggone, so why are you kind of stepping beyond its boundaries now and expanding into the Golden Triangle itself with Aniox?
It's a great question. I'm going to be I'm not going to say everything that I can say about Aniox and what excites us about it. There's a lot more to come on it, but I will start from the top down. So the vision for TDG is to become a preeminent copper gold exploration company, starting in BC, but obviously Canada is a twinkle in our eye. The Aniox copper acquisition gives us a new dimension to the company. It's not just about the seasonality, it's about the diversification geologically. It's a VMS deposit. The guys that have been in the background putting Aniox together have been plugging away there. They've put over 10,000 hectares together in essentially a forgotten district of British Columbia. And I challenge anyone out there to tell me another forgotten district with a history of prolific mining, where you could walk in and actually be a first mover. And when this came across our desk, when it was proposed, it raised our eyebrows, and we really were forced to take a deeper look and to obviously do the due diligence. And the more we, pushed it around amongst ourselves, the more we felt that it would make sense, and that now was the right time. And you never know when exactly the right time is, but at $5 copper, which I think we've crossed today, and we're believers in copper over, certainly the mid and longer term. And we're obviously big believers in precious metals right now. It's the right fit at the right time, and it takes us an enormous set of steps forward. There's a lot more to come in terms of the information on Aniox and the rationale. It's at an earlier stage to the Toodoggone. One of the key things that we stipulated is it mustn't distract away from what we're doing in the Toodoggone, and it won't. It's an earlier stage. It needs more compilation work. It needs more grassroots, geophysics, and sampling work, etc. But we're getting the sense already that this is something like the Toodoggone was in 2016 and 2017. And I just throw it out there. If you could now go be a first mover into the Toodoggone for the kind of entry price that we're contemplating paying for this, proposing to pay for this project, if you knew then what you know now, would you do it? And the answer unequivocally is yes. And so these opportunities don't come along very often. And when they do, you have to do your due diligence. You don't walk in lightly, but you take it seriously. And this elevates TDG's profile and relevance on a number of different strategic aspects. And so there's so much to come here. We're super excited. But the focus right now it's the two to gone, and welcoming that bought deal financing that we announced when it closes. That'll give us additional firepower to really focus on not just the area around the Aurora discovery now, but up that 12-kilometer corridor that we've identified. So we watch this space. The team is getting better. The project portfolio has been enhanced. The treasury is there to support what effectively is world-class exploration, and that's what you need to be doing, we think, at this point in the cycle.
No, thank you. No, well said. A couple left here, and then we'll transition into investor questions. There are a few in the chat here, and again, I'll encourage people here. We're nearing the end, but I think we'll be able to fit these in if I don't get too loquacious. But Chad, I'll push off to you here now. Honey Badger, you have quite a few projects across a few different jurisdictions in the north in a variety of geological settings, and so I mean, simple questions. You have a lot of hungry mouths to feed. How do you feed them all?
Well, they're not that hungry in the sense that our holding costs in aggregate are $65,000 a year for all 7 projects. So one way to look at them is they're essentially free call options on the commodity prices. So I talked about the silver, but we've got billions of pounds of zinc. I don't hear too many people jumping up and down about zinc, but at some point, possibly that'll be worth a lot of money. And, people, as I said earlier, people always ask us, 7 is a lot. Now, you've got to focus, and I mentioned Plata and Nanisivik are the 2 projects that we will be working on this year. They are the most, let's say, drill-ready, obvious. I mean, to me, they're both phenomenal. Nanisivik, just to talk about that for a second. Nanisivik, as I said, was a mine, Strathcona Mineral Services, very well operated mine. It stopped mining. They stopped mining essentially. There were other operators after that, but the zinc price went to 25-30 cents a pound. And what's very typical, once prospectors make a discovery, they turn it over to exploration geologists, who then turn it over to mine geologists. And then at some point, the exploration stops. And we inherited, we talked about, Simon talked about the government, the fact that we're blessed with the data being available. We, for a pint of Guinness one day, one of the members of our team, Mike Jalinan, ran into, because Mike used to work there, and he ran into a geologist that worked at Nanisivik, one of his former co-workers, and the guy said, "Hey, I've actually got a bunch of boxes of data," and so we went to pick it up in Florida, and the mineral endowment, it's dozens and dozens of kilometers of geophysical and geochemical anomalies that were never followed up, and to me, it's mind blowing how this could be. In this day and age available. We staked it for $18,000. That was our acquisition cost. And are there other Nanisiviks on our property? I can't prove it to you, but my gut says yes, there's going to be several others. I mentioned the 100 million ton pyrite deposit that's sitting there, and everybody on the line knows that the world needs more sulfuric acid. Well, what's that worth? And as I said, it's got germanium and gallium in it. So, I'm salivating, and I can go on and on talking about Nanisivik. I don't think our investors really understand or appreciate how good of an asset this is, mostly because it hasn't been a mine for 30 years. And, I guess really at the end of the day, it's up to me, it's up to us to inform and educate investors, the street, markets, analysts, about how good this target is for us.
No, excellent, Chad. And then, so Simon, a couple here back to back for you. I'll roll one in here from the audience as well. But I mean, your Bite Zone discovery, Bonanza Gold, 92 grams, excuse me, was the highlight there. But also, puts the bite in bismuth and tellurium, also with exceptional concentrations. Why is this such a significant discovery for your strategy and your geological thesis?
Well, geological thesis, I don't know. I had one. I mean, all of these intrusives had never seen boots on the ground. Storline's discovery showed that there was potential in the eastern belt, so I got boots on the ground, and that was the thesis. I mean, I've made quite a few discoveries over the last 20 years, but I've never seen anything quite like the grad system. It's I've got a cliff 450 meters high that's cut so much with sheeted veining, it's almost like a schist. This is a granodiorite intrusive that's Cretaceous in age, just shattered by veining. We're getting, the odd high grade, but like all these systems, there's visual gold. So the 92 grams really isn't that significant, but the high bismuth and tellurium it's a very powerful system. It shattered this whole mountainside. I'm very excited by the target. Let's get the drill turning in a week and see if we can show the continuity that is needed to make a mine.
Well, then really quickly back to you, Simon. This is from Bluefin. Can you just tell us about the Baby Bite, Ogre, or the visuals of your other reduced intrusion related gold systems? The targets?
We've staked a bunch of other targets in this area. The ground we had to the north, further north, as I said, we hit all these intrusives, walked through them, identified some anomalies, drill tested them. The other ones to the north didn't work out. This area where we are now with the grad is a very exciting target. We haven't had time yet for all the other small intrusives in the area where we are to explore them, because we just focused on the bite at the fall last year when we found it. I'll let you know in the fall what the others look like when we get our feet on them.
Yeah, well, good enough. Yeah, good enough. And then we got time here. One more. Tom has a decent question. I think Simon and Fletcher were kind of riffing on the large kind of historical databases that are accessible to Canadian explorers. I'll just read it verbatim here. I hesitate to use the four-letter word AI, but are you implementing AI to manage and assess or access the big historic databases that exist in Canada? And I guess Fletcher or Simon or Chad, anybody, any words on that one?
Yes.
No.
Yes.
We use AI, and it revealed some very interesting things. It's a good tool.
Yeah,
it's just a tool. It's one of many tools, but it worked for us. Yeah.
Yeah, we're taking a bottom-up approach. No, that's okay. Bottom-up approach. We're trying to use AI to assist us with real-world tasks, rather than trying to put in place some big AI overarching strategy that's too much change too quickly. We're asking the really pertinent question, which is, can it really add value? And if so, where? And so we're walking, slowly into AI in terms of our adoption, but what we're seeing so far, really, really impressed.
That's what I hear from everybody, is that AI, it's not the carpenter, it's the tool at this point, right? And make sure to use it appropriately as such. Anyway, gentlemen, I think that's it. That's all the questions in the chat, and that's all the questions I have. So thank you. It was illuminating and maybe a little bit badgered here and there, not to get too punny with Honey Badger, but a little bit of a rocky start. But I think we had some pretty good content here. So appreciate it, guys. And hey,
okay,
have a good day.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great job, Matt. Great job.
All right,
yeah,
thanks everyone.